show the simplified view of the monkey cortex. This is from the visual system. Different visual area, and it goes up all the way to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the structure in the brain is most far away from the sensory takeaway. This is a simple view. There's no sensory area because there is no auditory area, no vestibular area. So it's not complete. It's highly simplified. So each box here is a cortical area, the new cortex. And these lines here, these are the axons, long axons, the fibers, connected to parts. So even though most areas connected to many other areas, you can still have an error based on how the information flows. Some areas which earlier they go all the way up, so we have error, even though they're all feedback as well, right? So here is very far away. So what happens if you take this out? You take out hippocampus, right? So you get this memory deficit. This is a famous patient here. He has a surgical removal of both sides of the hippocampus. The hippocampus, the most classic part of the brain, a lot of the NMDA channel you learned before, has the highest concentration of the NMDA channel, which should be pattern learning, long-term potentiation. But those things tend to be self-reinforcing. If some activity is active, as we said before, you have to fire together, wire together, so they wire together. When they're wired together, they're even more likely to fire together. So they make the positive feedback. You eventually get something like a seizure, excitation. So this patient, once removed, gets very, it's not so bad. Once you remove the hippocampus and surrounding cortex, so he lost memory. It's not lost every memory. It's more like this, more like this. Hollywood did not have a movie play on this premise, right? Somehow you cannot form long-term only certain kind of memory. So in the past people didn't know, now we know better. There are different kinds of memory. Some memory, like how to ride a bicycle, how to tie a shoelace, but I think long-term memory is something more. So memory, like you remember a telephone number, just long enough so you can dial the number. Only a few seconds. That is short-term memory. That's in the near future. So hippocampus is kind of memory. If you remember what you had for breakfast today, think about what you had for breakfast. Can you remember it? But the fact that you didn't have any. So that, you can answer the question, what is hippocampus actually working? So that's kind of memory in hippocampus. But it's also, although you have some memory, you're still intelligent. Right? You're still intelligent, like these movies show you. You're still very perfectly intelligent. The short-term memory is okay. You can carry out the intelligent conversation. The problem is that once you switch context to something else, you will lost that context, and that stuff cannot be remembered. I think this movie is kind of interesting. Mental, you can see it, I recommend it. So it's a very clever way somehow to make you you have a first-person experience what it feels like if you don't have that long memory. That was really short. So that inspired people because of this kind of deficit. When you damage your campus, that's horrible. Maybe then don't like. When you don't have long-term memory, then you have to realize that all your life you're on memory, right? Because all the past is going on memory. So if you don't have a long-term memory, you don't have to do this lecture. You forget everything anyway afterward. Even if campus is okay, you most of the stuff. You don't want to go to school, right? After a few years, you don't remember anything, right? Even you only have a future, but the future is your plan for the future. The future does not exist yet. You don't plan the future, have to store your memories. You don't plan the future, yeah, if you don't plan immediately. So you only live in the present. One second, something like I'm just writing on the past, all gone, the future not there yet. That's horrible. So that inspired people to recording from the hippocampus rather than the movie practice. It was a physical program, tracking the position and having interaction, and to see how the neurons in the hippocampus actually work. So that leads to a series of discoveries. It's very, very intriguing. So I'm just lecture talk about this kind of system because it gives us an idea, but because most of the stuff we talk about is the experimental facts. Also gives some theoretical idea which is related to the attractive dynamics of our last time. Okay. Let's see the data. So when the animal moves around, this activity of the neuron and the function of animal's location is not like that, right? Their location that makes cell fire. The hippocampus itself is like that. So here's what this little rat running on a maze. There's an element track, speaker track, animal running around. You see this location and having the arrow right. See this. What's that? Each of the noise is a spike on the one particular neuron hippocampus. Right? You can see the cell in the hippocampus at the top of the brain is not firing most of the time. It's fine, right? It fires. That's no matter what. So you see, so based on the activity cell, if you report many cells simultaneously, just based on activity alone, you can figure out what location of the graph, without looking at the animal. So that's kind of surprising. When people first discovered it, people didn't believe that. So, there's maybe something, maybe visually looks complex, some special, there's some sensory system that detects something complex. If that's the case, you end up like something like this. But the problem is if you turn off the lights in the darkness, you remove something, the cell still persists in the same location. So that's very strange. So how is that possible? So that's related to this very idea I'm going to explain. So first, so what makes the cell fire in a special place? Look at this. So this is a control structure where the animal in the cylinder is symmetrical. I would say symmetry is central. There's a piece of paper placed on the wall. That's the only landmark of the system. Right? If you take out the animal and put it back in, the cell still fire in the same location. Some people did like over 100 days. You can maintain the cell is still like the same location, even in the fixed environment. That's still trying to take. So you play a trick. You take out the animal and then you put the car in a new location. You put the animal back in. See this cell. The place field where it's on fire will take the same angle as the rotation of that landmark. So that means firing is really based on the familiar landmark that you turn away from. Just based on this thing, you realize, okay, yeah, this is maybe a very sophisticated visual set. Because if you're in this location, this visual cue looks at the way you go different direction because the geometry looks kind of different. Right? If you have a very sophisticated visual detector, it will be like this. As I said before, so what happens? If you remove the card from the animal, don't play a trick, just the animal just won't play a trick. Rather, move the card slowly, right in front of the animal. If that's a visual cell, what would you predict? The cell will turn off because that visual cue is gone, right? But it turns out most cells still fire in the same location. Before you turn off the light, the darkness will fire in the same location. This is not just a visual cell, there's some memory component there as well. It learns the familiar landmark, right, to anchor you in the correct position. But if the landmark is gone, you're still okay. As long as you're not confused. Right? That's very interesting, right? How is that possible? Okay, they all discover many different cells. Some of this is why I put the hyperactive cell. The first discovery is place cell. Right? second discovery is the path direction, so like compass direction. It's in a location, so the path circuit, it is a circuitry involving multiple sub-vertical areas that connect with the hippocampus. And the most recent discovery is for the gray cell. This parametric spatial location in the frontal cortex. That's the next location of the hippocampus. All these three cells are in the ward corner system. I can explain. It's not relative to you, it's related to the ward-centered corner system. You don't have a sensor that can do that, right? So they must be computed based on many different information. Two types. One type of information is for the system. One is linear landmarks, it's the cues from the environment. Another based on self-motion. So in your car GPS system, you actually use both, right? One is for the GPS localization, but that's not a real landmark based on time delay. Another passenger, if your car goes into a tunnel, you cannot receive any flight. You use your velocity and the directional heading to do the directional path. So the system uses both. In navigation literature, it's called dead reckoning. Hold the sailor on the map based on where you're heading, based on the speed, you can calculate what the estimate is. The system actually uses both. So why the remote landmark system still work? Because you still have this passenger system is working. Right? If it stays too long, you get error in the computer. You need a landmark calibration. All right, so that's very cool. You see this piece of card on the wall, the white card, right? That's a poorly landmark, otherwise symmetric. The cells are very quiet. Particularly in the cell, it's not pure cell, it's part of the passenger system. The cells are quiet, and when looking around, the cables are working to report from a single neuron. Some of the animal is curious. For example, heading in that direction. Now the direction so now you can plot the activity of the cell finally, respect per second, as a function of heading direction, you get this sort of Gaussian curve. You get Gaussian. Look like it's fake. No, it's not something very but it is like that. So this direction is called the preferred direction. Right? You can move away from preferred direction. So you have to realize this direction in a work common system, in the sense that suppose the animal like in the work direction. So animal would run this way a little momentarily and had aligned with that preferred direction, that's how fire. So see what's in common about this cell fire in that direction. Actually, people can take the animal to a different room and still fire in the same direction. So the preferred fire is always parallel with each other. But the sensory cue in another room, there's nothing in common with this room. In principle, there are nothing in common. It looks as if you're driven by a cue at an infinite distance. It's really far away. But maybe the magnetic cell or another geomagnetic cue, no, it's not. If you rotate that landmark, the thing also rotates based on landmark. It's very similar to the place that, except for this is one dimension of heading direction. It's worse than the coordinate system based on familiar landmark. It also sustains the fire in the darkness. Once again, it's not this particular direction anything special. You can for many cells, see, they like different directions, cover all possible directions. And of course, firing is different, listening is different, not very same shape. Yeah, this is an interesting experiment. It shows that if you record from two different steps at the same time, two has to record at the same time. If you do the manipulation, you got to change, okay, the change from one room to a different room with no cue car. The result at that mark. Of course, the preferred direction of the cell is to a different direction. If you record two cells simultaneously, you see, their relative difference of type direction is constant. So basically, you have a rigid field. Question there?
Question for the head direction cells.
Yeah.
So if you do the same thing where you move the landmark really slowly in front of the animal,
yeah.
where like the animal can see it physically move,
yeah.
does the head direction still fire and towards the landmark or in the same direction?
They're in the same direction.
As before?
Yeah, as a place. So this is the experiment where it's basically the head direction cell, their preferred direction and rigidly coupled with each other. over rigid frame. Right? You also rigidly coupled with your place cell like this. Right? This is place cell. There are two different cells of course simultaneously. In this case, animal is spinning around in between the two different sections. This is the head directing cell, the two place cells of course simultaneously. Right? In this case, you see the place cell, for some reason, the animal is confused. Maybe it will rotate into a different group. Rotate from here. And this one rotates about the same angle. And the head right also rotates the same angle. So the whole system is coupled together. Why is it wrong? So the gently disoriented, you don't know where you are. So I think that how much you would be like, sometimes we're disoriented. You ever be disoriented? Some people are familiar place, sometimes driving in a highway, I'm not sure if it's south or north, but it is not possible if you GPS it, in the past, it's very possible, but I'm not sure where I'm at. Some people look at the position of the sun, realize it's like disoriented based on some signs on the street, but you realize disoriented. So what do you mean disoriented? It's like your internal sense of direction, hopefully will be presented by the activity itself. Right? They may be different from the word frame. They're rigid frame and rotated. No matter what you think is the north, you know the opposite is south. You're never confused about that. Right? This whole system is rigid, but it can be rigid rotated relative to the north. That's possible. So in this case, the place cell also rotates in the same angle, which is gently disoriented. Usually it's very complicated. Totally continuing environment that may happen. The remap is more complicated. All right. So there was a Nobel Prize 3 years ago awarded to the Zhang who discovered the place cell in late 1960s. The more recent discovery is based on the Nobel Prize team way that they find this place cell. So people say they discovered internal random inner GPS system, which is not very true, but it has something to do with space, but it's not really a GPS system. It's based on completely different principles, based on landmark and path migration. So that anterolateral cortex, we discovered the brace cell. That's a very striking discovery. It's from here. So anterolateral cortex, see this here? That's the area that's very close to the campus. So you want to find out why they get the place cell in the right location. The brain cell really exhibits a compass, right? And this brace cell is kind of unexpected. You don't know what's new to the campus. Here's one experiment. So it's the same thing. Animal is running. There's no pathology, but when there's a spike in the neuron, you plot the spike where location is, the spike occurs in the right back. In the past, people saw that these cells not very special because they seem to fire everywhere. They were running around, they seem to fire everywhere. They look at it, yeah, maybe they're firing scattered, very scattered. There's the experimenter there. They just try to do some chocolate chips and throw it on the floor so to encourage animals to move around. Animals moving around, it seems that kind of random. But if you wait long enough, right, use large enough environment, apparently if you use the environment too tiny, maybe not long enough, you can see the pattern. You see very wait long enough. Kind of stuff to learn, you see, over time. So prior to this kind of a
really, no, I don't think anybody predict this, anybody expected this. It's very strange. So the brain work in a very strange way. Oh, that's very similar to the place cell. Those things also work in the dark. So this, this is like 3 things over here, 3 bobs. In the dark, it's still far in the same location, right? You go back, of course. And if you rotate the landmark like before, it also rotate with the same angle. So it's all the 3 systems work in a consistent way, right? But this periodic firing is really strange, right? You look at this cell, right? So the black things here, the trajectory, is red dots as the location of the animal when the spike occurs. Right? There's 3 cells recorded simultaneously. So these are the average firing rate based on this. So just averaging, you see this hexagonal pattern. If you put them together, you can see more clearly. See the cells nearby in the endocrine cortex, they have very similar grid fields, with similar spacing and orientation, except for the spatial location of the peak, what the spatial phase is different. That's if you superimpose them, you see this green ones, the red ones are displaced with each other. All right. Okay, there's one final fact I want to mention is that if you move the cell nearby, they have a similar spacing, similar orientation. But if your cell very far away from the ventral dorsal, then you realize, you discover that there are different spacings. It's not a continuum of possible space. They're only discrete. Here they show 4. It's about 4, maybe 5. It's only a few, right? And this spacing, this is the smallest, somewhat. It's further apart, and further apart. It's like some kind of, I think it's some kind of basis function, like a Fourier basis function. They're different. There are different spacing. It's very interesting, right? And this. Yeah, so only a few possibilities. All right, but then how to think about this kind of system? But it's certainly very unexpected. Right? First, people want to discover for the memory consolidate for the long-term memory, what called declarative memory, right? Because or episodic memory. So memory you have a space and time you can talk about, or some kind of general knowledge that depend on hippocampus. And that's inspired people to do recording. Recording, then they find out the space-related cells. Right? So the high direction cell, we think it is the current theory. Right? It said this is a attractor system. Attractor is the same thing we talk about the half-field network. It's called a point attractor because there are some states in the state space that's stable. You have a state nearby, will suck into that stable state, right? But this system also likes that. It has internal stable states, but we have a topology like a ring. So that's this high direction cell. According to the same kind of theory, so the grid cell is really a torus attractor. It's a two-dimensional sheet, somehow equivalent to you connect the edge together. So it's periodic. And the plane cells are like planes, also maybe a attractor state. That's one idea that's kind of very popular right now, right? So I'll give you the explanation because this is closely related to what we talked about before. I'll give you some explanation how this thing works in general. But if you talk about detail, there are too many details. We just talk about the general idea. All right. So first of all, we start with high direction cell because one dimension is easier to understand, right? Just we recap what we learned before. So you start from here. So the icon with the red means the preferred direction of the animal. It doesn't depend on where you're located, like the same preferred direction for that particular cell. All right. If you rotate the landmark, you rotate the same way, right? So this means the visual information here, it does affect where the cell fires. Okay, but on the other hand, this kind of experiment, you remove the landmark slowly in front of the animal, don't play any trick, or you turn off the light in the dark, right? As the animal works in the dark, the cell still works, still maintain the same preferred direction, at least for some minutes. If we wait too long, sometimes it may drift to other location. So this is sort of contradictory. One is that the visual cue is so important that you determine where you fire. On the other hand, you don't rely on it at all. It is how is that possible? Well, so this is a way to visualize the system. You can say how is this possible from a computational and theoretical point of view. Right? This is some idea I'm going to show you. So you imagine you can visualize all the cells, right, in the high direction cell, and you place them in a ring according to their preferred direction. So the cells over here, they like the north direction, for example, right? So when animal is facing north, just by definition, is how the ring contracted the cells, the preferred direction nearby should be activated, right? Because these cells like this direction. Other cells different, they are not activated, right? So this is instantaneous, like a God's eye view. At the same time, this activity is spread among all the cells. In the experiment, they record one cell at a time. In that case, what you mean is that because what it implies that when animal head moves, the activity, so the heel of activity or bump activity, move to a different location, same direction as animal, the actual head, right? So the thing to visualize this is that this is based on data. Right? There's no theory here. It's just paraphrasing the data. So you basically have a hot spot of activity or bump or heel of activity, centered on the ring, or somewhere stayed on the ring, it moves with the animal. It's like a neural simulator. I have a hotspot. Animal's head, I represent animal's current heading direction. Animal's head moves, my hotspot moves. If I record from a single neuron, for example, the neuron in the north, like here, right? You realize that this cell is active when animal's head is facing here, but the activity goes down if animal's head move away. So you get this sort of a tuning curve. But that's sort of in a single cell wild animal, you average, you sample over all different possible directions. So that turns out to be equivalent. The tuning curve is equivalent to the shape of this bump. All right. So all this theory need to explain. What do you need to explain in the theory like this? You need to explain why is that this activity can be sustained without the input, and you can get rid of landmark, get out of thing. Why landmark also can control the location, right? All right. So the key thing to explain that if without landmark, if the cell has a tuning curve, which means that if animal, facing here, the cell is active. You face a different direction, the activity has to move to a new location, right? How is that possible? So that's sort of that's path integration system comes in. So here we go back to the neural network model. So here we have the same network model as similar to a continuous half-wave network. You should imagine you have a system like this. You have seen this before, all right? The time derivative has a linear term, which you do nothing else. It will decay, like exponential decay. There's a sum. That's the inputs from all other cells in the network to the particular cell I, right? Received from all cell J. That we saw that before. There's also some external inputs. So external input here could be input from a landmark, right? Or input from the self-motion information with something from external. So the network itself just sustains that activity bump, right? So this is very similar to the half-wave network. So half-wave network has a discrete memory you want to store. Here you actually have a continuum possible state. So the idea is this. You look at the one neuron here is one circle, all right? So suppose this neuron project to the near neighbor, the neighbor to nearby with strong excitation, and project the neuron far away with inhibition. Of course, a single neuron does not change its sign, it's called Dale's principle, but you have to change it becomes inhibitory through inhibitory interneuron. Right? We don't talk about that, in great detail, but that's also in the half-wave network. Sometimes, the same neuron that goes out, some are positive weights, some are negative weights, right? The negative weight presumably has to go through some inhibitory neuron. But in this here, we just lump together as a simplified model. All right, so if you plot that connection weights as a function of the distance between the different cells. But here the ring, I show it the line, but this side is actually wrapped around connect with the other side. All right, but the distribution is the same. So basically we said this has a shift invariant or rotation invariant structure in the sense that the connection from this cell to the next neighbor is the same if it goes through here, this cell to this next neighbor. So only the relative distance on this ring really matter, determine the connection. It doesn't matter, it's not, the absolute direction doesn't matter, right? Because not any direction is not different from any other direction. So you get this kind of a connection pattern, it's like a Mexican hat, pattern that you excite your near neighbor, you inhibit the neighbor far away. Right. Just suppose you have this kind of connection. If you do that, the system has a very interesting property. Right? Here, just one example. That you lay the cells around from 0 degree to 360 degree. That's wrapped around. You start. So this axis is activity. In the beginning, you have some random activity distributed there. All right. Then it will evolve. This is a snapshot in time. It will evolve in time. Eventually, see there's a bump activity will emerge and stays there forever. Right. So if you start from different initial state, like here you have two bumps, initial states, eventually one of them will win over, eventually several goes to a single bump. Right? Because the system is symmetrical, this is a phenomenon called symmetry breaking. Because you see, they have a ring of cells, so each cell, its connection with other neighbors is exactly the same. You go to a different cell, it's the same, right? So everybody is equal. You would imagine the stable state of the system would be symmetrical. So everybody equally active, right? That's a symmetrical state, right? It turns out for this system, you can make that state unstable. It's like if you want to balance a pencil on the tip, Right? It's really symmetrical. Every direction is the same. But that state is not stable. It is an equilibrium state, but if you any perturbation, it will fall to somewhere. It's not for everywhere. It's not can fall ever simultaneously. Even the system is symmetrical, but that's stable. In the upright position is unstable. So only it fall to somewhere. That's a stable state. So this is similar. It had to fall to somewhere. The bump had to emerge somewhere. It's not symmetric. It's not symmetric, right? So that means that depends on this. That means you can design a society, some structure. Maybe everybody seems like equal right. Somehow someone gets extremely rich and suppress other people. So that's a stable state. Everybody equal is not stable. Depend on how you design the system, right? You can make the parameter such that everybody equally active is a stable state. That's also possible. But you can also make it to be this like has a symmetric breaking. All right. This is a comparison with half-wave network where, so in this diagram, the xy position would be equivalent to the state of system. For example, one axis would be activity of one neuron, the other axis activity of another neuron. This is like abstract space, like state space, right? And the third dimensional height would be the energy function or the Lyapunov function. So for the half-wave network, you have several discrete stable states. You have this called a point attractor where that's a stable state, right? This system, it's more like, this thing looks like the bottom of a wine bottle, right? You have a continuum of stable states. They're equally, the energy is about the same, right? You start from somewhere, it will roll down to the nearest state and stays there. But every state here is equally stable, right? So where you end up with depends on the initial states, all right? So what does the stability mean? That means if I any other state, I have an arbitrary shape of activity put on the system, that's not stable. Going to merge, eventually that bump will emerge. So that state at the bottom ring is that stereotypical shape of the stable bump, right? So you move along this ring means that you put the bump on different cells. It can be moved around, right? Because the energy of different states is the same. So you need very tiny force to put the bump to any location you want. All right. This is like a balance. This is like a balance of ball on a perfectly flat table. Right. Even that's called neutral equilibrium. There are three kinds of equilibrium. One is stable, it goes down. One is unstable, at the top of a peak. Right. Another is neutral. It's like a flat. If it's just flat, you can put it anywhere. But if you have a very small disturbing force, if it's a really perfect flat, you can move it anywhere. Right. So here is the example. So you start from here. This bump, if you don't do anything, it will stay there forever, right? Now suppose you excite the cells in the neighborhood of 180 degrees, right? Just over here. So what happens is that would, as if I see a visual landmark. The visual system gives me. I learned in the past when that visual landmark see that thing, that means you should go to 180 degrees, right? So that you can imagine those sensors. Or maybe there's some particular location, particular smell, whatever. There's some sensor will drive some bunch of cell. Why you drive this bunch of cell? Because they were learned in the past. They should be associated, right? Based on maybe the habit learning. So if you imagine you can do that, if you excite this bunch of cell over here, no matter how small, you wait long enough, turns out this thing will move to the new location. It's just because everywhere it's equally stable. But if I get a bias, make that thing even slightly more, energy slightly lower, eventually it will move to the new location. So that's very interesting, right? Because you see, based on the visual landmark, you say, oh, this has a dominating effect. It must be so overwhelmingly strong, even though no matter where you're looking at, once you see the Q, you calibrate to a new location. But based on dynamics, you don't need very strong input. You need a tiny input that will move because of symmetry, right? You just need a small force to break that symmetry. So what about this passing grid? What happens if you move? You move, the activity bump needs to move. So for the continuous attractor, you can actually have a moving thing like this. So this, if you imagine, you start from the same cell, right? If its connection to the neighbor has shifted, it's not symmetric anymore. In the past, you remember the symmetric that I treat my left neighbor and my right neighbor in exactly the same way. But if you make this shift, I excite my right neighbor more. And the situation is same everywhere. So the activity will move. You start with the bump. If you do that, it will move towards the right, right? And this state, remember, it's actually it is a stable state. Even if it's a traveling state, that traveling state itself is stable. That means if you disturb the system, you start from arbitrary thing, this bump will emerge while traveling. If you make perturbation, the perturbation go away, it will be stable. Now, I'm going to ask you to do a simulation. You can play with the system to see for yourself, or you can do this kind of stuff. So how does the system really do the passing equation? I'm giving a little bit more material, right, and you need, but just give you an idea. Because in the real situation, if I move my head, the activity move to a new location, I cannot change my connection, right, make it asymmetrical. Because that's too fast. I cannot change my synapse that fast. So what really happens is something like this, right? You have multiple group of cells. Here are two. I mean, in reality, there are many more. They're much more complicated. This is a very cartoon picture explanation. I give a very brief explanation. If you don't understand that, that's okay. But it's just a rough idea. The idea is that you have two different groups of cells. Both are high-direction cells, right? They're competing against each other. This is a right group. It's like a right wing group. Their opinion is that we should move to the right. It bias toward the right. The same everywhere. It drives itself to the right. It drives the other group to the right. The left group do the opposite direction. They try to shift everything towards the left. Because they're symmetrical, they are competing against each other, but actually move to nowhere. Huh? Like the Republican push this way, Democrat push the other way. It's like a deadlock, and you cannot move anywhere. Just stay in the middle, right? But if you have some external force, I excite this right group more, right? They get excited more, then their push toward the right will be higher, right? It depends on which group has a weight. I mean, from external input, I excite all your group to lift everybody up. Right? That could come from the vestibular system, and the system that sense which direction you are moving, how fast you are moving. If you have that group will win over. So here you can see the right group is higher. If a higher rate than the left group, it will move to the right. If the left group has a higher rate, it will move to the left. Right? So in that way, you don't need to change the weight. So the system will be equivalent to having asymmetric weight. But you already have built-in asymmetric weight, bias in different direction. But if you bias them to emphasize one over the other, so the overall weight will be biased in one direction. So that's just a very brief explanation. If you don't understand completely, that's okay. All right. All right. So this idea, you can be generalized to two dimensions. So in this case, you should imagine you have a bunch of neurons, all right, placed on a two-dimensional grid. Imagine you have a bunch of neurons, all right. Now they're connected in a similar way. You excite your near neighbor, you inhibit your far neighbor, right? But in a two-dimensional way. Really, you need to rotate that weight distribution function. You spin it around, really like a Mexican hat right now. If you do that in a proper way, the system has a similar property that you start from random initial states, the bomb will emerge somewhere, it will stay there. If you bias the connection, the bomb activity will drift. All right. All right, so they're interesting questions. So if you have a room, there's a bunch of cells here, all right? When the animal is, now you imagine, you put all the cells on the floor, according to the location of the center of the plate field, right? When animal is here, it's similar to that ring trick, right? When animal is here, all the cells like location should be light up. You can imagine all the cells. You can imagine put the cell in the hippocampus, put on the floor according to where they like the location. Just like a visualize the stuff, right? When animal is here, the activity will rise up. When animal moves, activity moves with the animal, all right? But that's fine. This is just tautology. It's a way to visualize the data. But what happens if animal goes outside of a room, right? If you can remove the wall, animal move to a new location, what happens there? Well, so one way to do this is that maybe when animal moves outside of the room, right, the neural activity actually re-emerges there in the opposite side of the room. You can do that in the neural system, right? If in that case, when animal move forward, so the activity just wrap around, right? If you go you exit from the other door, the activity you really emerge from the opposite side and it goes here. I don't know. Remember, you see some movie like like a Keanu Reeves. I don't know. This like a long time ago. This like a Matrix. One of the Matrix movies. Like you go through I think it's a subway station. You move in one way and then you appear on the other side. So it's like this is like a torso representation, right? So according to some people, the world is kind of like that. Right? If you shine a laser in the night, you can follow laser forward, go go all the way. If you go long enough, you can follow that light. Eventually, the Earth will appear in front of you. Just like it's not like a two-dimensional ball, but in 3D space, that's that's one mathematical possibility. So this case, if you wrap this around, you get the torus. So this is of course you get that. So that's sort of equivalent to this kind of system. You can generate a gray cell in that way. So basically, you represent the space with a tile, the identical tile. You move the tile around, right? Just maybe a one-dimensional example with like a tire. Imagine you have a tire in your car. You mark a location on a tire. The tire, when you go in a space in a linear manner, but the tire will hit the ground. Your marked point will hit the ground in a periodic location. It's not a rigorous analogy, but it's somewhat similar to maybe the neural representation itself is periodic inside. The animal can move around, so you get this periodic representation. So the exact manner you need more explanation. I'm not going to explain more detail, right? Besides this very brief, very basic analogy. So there are different ways that you can use. You can use the system with a single bump on a torusal structure, or you have the Turing pattern. That's equivalent to a torus. It's more complicated to explain that you have this sheet of cells. Depending on how you're connected, if your inhibition not far enough, you have this Turing pattern. So you have activity, not just one bump emerge, but many bumps emerge at the same time. I mean, you don't inhibit things that are farther away. You only inhibit your very close neighbors. The further away, you can allow things to emerge. This is observed by Turing. It's the same Alan Turing who was the foundation, who set the foundation for computer science, right? But he also said this, he had a paper to chemical basis morphogenesis, so that how you can generate this kind of spatial pattern based on this. We say excitation inhibition. He used a chemical term for that, right? All right. So we say maybe I spend all the time talking about this cell found in rats, basically. But there are other things like rat and mouse all have similar cells, right? What about the other animal? In the bat, actually, you have a place cell has actually in 3D space, 3-dimensional space. There are animals they live in 3D, right? Like rats live in a 2D surface. They also find that in fruit fly you have a high directness cell. In that case, because they can do the image, you really can see that ring in front of your eyes. They're ellipsoid body. It's really shaped like an ellipsoid. When the fruit fly heading some direction, there is a hot spot you can see by imaging as really move around. You can really see that. What about a monkey? Monkey has a direction cell, but they also have a view cell. It's not really place cell. There might be place cell as well, but there are also a lot of view cells. The view cell is that the animal, the monkey, they look at a particular location, the cell fires. So if the animal go to a different location, look at the same location, again, the cell also fire. It's really the terminal direction of the gaze will determine the activity of the cell, right? Because the idea is that, if you are interested in a place, if you're a rat, your eyesight is very poor. Yours is very, very short, right? You're close to the ground. You have to bring your nose to that location to find out what's going on. A monkey, or like us, you just look, right? So the theory behind it, I'm not sure it's actually correct or not. It's a similar idea. You do the path integration, now integrate your velocity, integrate your gaze, right? Eye gaze. This thing also works in darkness. It's not just visual cell. So if an animal like this location, if you turn off the light in the dark, your animal look at that, empty space, that cell still fires. That's very similar to, in that way, it's similar to the place cell. Except for really you move your eye, you don't have to be physically there. In humans, you probably have these cells as well, because people have, if epilepsies have some electrode to monitor things. There's some experiment, the data is very sparse, we don't have a lot of data, but they have something similar, where people playing in a game, they play video game, virtual reality. Right? You can find out people, some cell active when the people in their video game in a particular location, facing in a particular way in the street. You can play a taxi driver, play around, let them play, and you find a cell like that. For the grid cell, the evidence is that when people play virtual reality game, you do imaging, functional MRI, right? The activity as a function of your heading in the virtual space actually has a 60-degree symmetry, the periodic activity. That suggests you maybe have a lot of cells which have the like 6 hexagonal symmetry. Let me say, we not just say the monkey and the rat's a really weird animal, maybe we're human much smarter. We don't have this periodic and like geometric stuff. Maybe we have that too, right? Maybe we have that too. Yeah, let's just show you the example for the bats flying in the 3D space. The hippocampus cell likes some particular location in space, suspended in 3D space. Right? As an example, their head direction is also 3D. Because the animal, for us, or a rat, we are like a really two-dimensional animal. We are not really very 3D. For the bats, they also do this hanging upside down trick, right? They just they can stay there like this, where we move away, depart this way, right? So they need to represent this upside down position as well. We are not very good at it. We're upside down. Typical people are very confused, right? It's very bad for you. So their representation is really, this direction is not just a ring, it's 2 rings, right? There's another ring. So a torus is a product of 2 rings, right? Another ring is a pitch, look up, look down, right? If you just look, north, south, this is the same as along this ring, like a ring attractor. But if you look up and down, the activity, people also imagine this is it's a attractor network. You have activity bump, it moves this way along the small ring. Either go down or go this way. Right? It's really represented like a 3D space. Yeah, this is a human data. I'm sure you have seen this in the popular press. People very like this kind of stuff. In human hippocampus, for epileptic patient, you have an electrode recording. They can do virtual navigation. They also do see the picture with things, right? There's an example that some cells, I don't know, this is the Jennifer Aniston cell, right? Which they like her some reason. So this is the activity, the different trials. You see the spikes, different trial. There's a cumulative like her. That's her with a former boyfriend here. It doesn't work very well. There are other people, right? I don't know where the spider. So they have a cell very specific to her, right? So you say, what is the hippocampus? In the beginning, I said hippocampus, because it is as memory deficits that people start to study it, and they find all the cells with sort of fascinating spatial representation, so geometric, it's kind of really weird, right? Like for the philosopher, like a German philosopher, like a Kant, right? Philosopher said there are some concept it's really innate, right? You have to, like a space, time is a very basic stuff. You have some in your brain, I didn't say, but now we see in your brain you have this frame, like you have this a grid representation already, a rigid frame right there. Your spatial representation built upon these kind of inputs, right? That's not what you can see directly, but you do have some rigid frame. And then you said you have spatial, but what about this kind of memory, remember someday or something? But you see this kind of cell, that's very specific in the space of faces, right? In person, you have different people. You imagine you have a big space of different people, but each person is a point, right? And these cells like certain things, like this one. This is a Halle, her name written in English, right? So this is you know how this can be done, right? If you have half your network, this is called associative memories. All the things associated with her name and so maybe how it sounds, a different thing. That's a big stable state according to some theory, right? So if you give me a partial cue, the whole thing is activated. If I record from a single cell, that cell is active for her, no matter what cue you start with, doesn't matter, eventually will suck into that state. So how does hippocampus work? There are also cells that are, like landmarks. So this is Sydney Opera House cell, which is cells like the Sydney Opera House. There are also cells like Pisa Leaning Tower. They don't like other things, right? So these things, we don't have a theory for this system completely yet. There are some ideas that will just show that the dynamical theory, how these things may actually happen. You can see the system can remember discrete state, a stable state, maybe pointer attractor, maybe continuous variable like a spatial variable. So it's all embedded in there. So your memory, episodic memory in space and time embedded in a spatial temporal framework. And how that's done, there are actual theory and the data don't have time to talk about. I only talk about some basic feature that's closely related with the neural network theory that we learned before. Just make a small extension. You can see the system can represent both discrete memory variables and some continuous variables. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you.